The hall lights dimmed slowly as soft music rose in the air, and no one inside the grand wedding venue expected that the quiet man who stepped through the door would change the entire night. People turned their heads one by one, their conversations fading, their breathing slowing, because the moment carried a strange weight that no one could explain. A few guests whispered his name, some blinked in disbelief, and others simply stared like they had seen a ghost from a past that never fully rested. The hook of the night began at that exact second, because the world seemed to pause when Keanu Reeves walked into the wedding after so many silent years, unaware that someone in the far corner was already trembling at the sight of him. Sandra Bullock had not prepared herself for this moment. She had told herself again and again that she was fine, that life had moved on, that old feelings had cooled, and that time had covered everything with a calm layer of acceptance. But when she looked up and saw him enter, her heart reacted before her mind could catch up. Her hands shook as she tried to hide behind a group of guests, yet she could not stop her eyes from following his steps. She felt memories pressing against her chest like they had been waiting for this exact moment to rise again. She tried to steady her breath, but the air in the room felt too thin to pull in. Keanu stood at the entrance for a moment, adjusting his jacket, unaware of the ripple he had caused. He was there because they both had a mutual friend getting married, someone they had known for years, someone who once said they were destined to meet again. He scanned the hall with a calm expression, but deep inside he carried a heaviness that no one could see. The last few years had been filled with quiet struggles, long nights, and unanswered thoughts he never admitted to anyone. He did not know Sandra would be here, and when his eyes finally found her across the room, something inside him tightened. The look they shared lasted less than a second, but it was enough to bring back 1,000 moments they had locked away. It pulled the past into the present with such force that Sandra felt her knees weaken. She looked down quickly, pretending to adjust her dress, but Keanu felt the shift inside him. He had spent so long trying to forget what he never actually wanted to let go. He turned his face away before the emotions rose too fast, but fate had already grabbed hold of the night and refused to let it slip away. Guests were busy celebrating, laughing, drinking, and dancing, yet the two of them felt like they were standing in a separate time zone. The music seemed softer to them, the lights dimmer, the voices distant. Sandra tried to act natural as friends greeted her, but she kept losing her focus, answering with slow nods and half smiles because her mind kept circling back to one truth she had buried deeply, the truth that she had once cared for him more than she ever admitted aloud, even to herself. Keanu moved through the room politely, greeting old friends, keeping his smile gentle and respectful. But every few minutes his eyes drifted toward Sandra without meaning to, pulled by something familiar yet fragile. He remembered her laughter, her warmth, her way of grounding him without trying. He remembered a time when they worked together and understood each other without speaking. And he remembered the quiet moment years ago when he almost told her something important but held himself back because timing was wrong and life was complicated. The wedding ceremony began and guests took their seats. Sandra ended up near the front while Keanu sat several rows behind her. He could see her profile from where he sat, the curve of her cheek, the slight tension in her shoulders, the soft movement of her hair when she shifted. It felt unreal to him, almost like a dream replaying itself with new details. He watched her gently wipe a tear during the vows, and even though the moment belonged to the couple on the stage, Keanu felt something old and unfinished move inside him. After the ceremony, the hall transformed into a warm celebration with soft lights and elegant decorations. Laughter echoed across the room and the dance floor filled quickly. Sandra stayed near a table with her drink, trying to avoid the possibility of crossing paths too soon. But fate did not care about her plans. One of their old friends approached her with a bright smile and said that someone wanted to see her. Before she could ask who it was, she turned and saw Keanu standing only a few steps away. He looked calm, but there was something in his eyes that told a different story. He took a slow breath before speaking, and his voice carried a gentle sincerity that made her heart tighten instantly. He said he did not expect to see her here, and she replied with the same truth. Their first few words were careful, almost too polite, like they were trying to protect themselves from emotions they were not ready to face yet. But underneath their calm tone, there was a storm waiting to rise. They moved to a quieter corner of the hall, where the music was softer and fewer people passed by. Sandra felt nervous, and her heart raced so fast she wondered if he could hear it. Keanu noticed the way she held her glass with both hands, and he wished he could tell her that he was just as unsettled. He wanted to say that seeing her again after so long shook him more than he expected, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked her how she had been, and she answered honestly, saying she had been good but busy, though her voice had a small tremble he noticed instantly. He nodded gently and said the years had been strange for him too, filled with unexpected challenges and quiet moments he never talked about. They stood there with a silence between them that felt heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt like something they had avoided for years was finally moving closer. The music shifted to a slower, softer melody, and some couples on the dance floor paired up. Their friend, the bride, saw Keanu and Sandra standing together and smiled from afar, whispering something to her new husband. She always believed they had a connection that never got the chance to grow. Keanu looked at Sandra for a moment, hesitated, then asked gently if she wanted to dance. The question caught her breath and her chest tightened with emotion. She looked around nervously as if searching for a way out, but something deep inside her wanted this moment more than she wanted to admit. She placed her hand in his slowly, and he held it with the same respectful gentleness he always had. They stepped onto the dance floor and everything else around them faded. Sandra felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest as Keanu placed his other hand on her back with careful respect. She rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, and for a moment she felt the years fall away. The distance, the silence, the missed chances, everything seemed to melt into the background. They began to move slowly, and Sandra felt his heartbeat steady and calm beneath his shirt. Keanu felt her breath near his chest, and it brought back memories he had tried to forget. They moved in quiet harmony, their emotions thick and swirling, their thoughts tangled in what-ifs and maybes. The dance was gentle, but the feelings inside them were intense, almost overwhelming. As they danced, Sandra whispered something she did not plan to say, something that slipped out before she could stop it. She said she had missed him. Her voice cracked slightly, but the words were real, raw, honest. Keanu froze for a split second, and Sandra felt his heartbeat change beneath her hand. He looked down at her with eyes that held so much emotion she almost looked away. He wanted to answer her, and he wanted to tell her the truth, that he had missed her too more than he ever admitted, but before he could speak, the music stopped suddenly. The room erupted in applause for the bride and groom entering the hall again, breaking the moment apart too quickly and leaving their hearts suspended in midair. They stepped back from each other, overwhelmed and breathless. And that was when someone unexpected walked up behind them, calling Sandra's name in a voice that instantly changed the air around them. The moment froze, and the night shifted again. The voice behind Sandra carried a strange mix of surprise and sharp curiosity, and the moment she heard it, her shoulders stiffened instantly. She turned slowly, her heart beating harder than before, and Keanu took one careful step back as if giving her space to process what was happening. The guests around them continued celebrating, laughing, and clapping, unaware that a silent storm had begun to form in that small corner of the hall. The man who had called her name stepped closer with a confident walk, dressed in a dark suit, holding a glass of champagne that he had barely touched. His expression revealed a complicated blend of emotions that did not match the joyful atmosphere of the wedding. His presence felt heavy, not because he was rude or unpleasant, but because of the history he shared with Sandra, a history Keanu immediately sensed even though no words were spoken yet. Sandra swallowed, trying to keep her breath steady. The man introduced himself to Keanu politely, but something behind his tone hinted that he already knew exactly who Keanu was. He offered a polite smile, but his eyes were locked on Sandra with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Keanu noticed the shift in her posture, the way she held her hands tighter and the way her smile became smaller, almost forced. He felt a protective instinct rise inside him, when he had not felt in years. The man asked Sandra if they could talk privately, saying he had something important he wanted to discuss. The request came with an urgency that made Keanu study him more carefully. Sandra hesitated, her eyes drifting toward Keanu for a brief second, and that small glance held more meaning than she intended. It revealed worry, confusion, and an unspoken plea for patience. Keanu nodded subtly, signaling that he understood, though his chest felt heavier than it had moments ago. She followed the man toward a quieter hallway near the entrance, leaving Keanu standing alone beneath the soft golden lights of the wedding hall. He watched her disappear around a corner, feeling something he had not expected to feel tonight, something deep and unsettling. It was not jealousy in the ordinary sense, but a mix of concern, regret, and a quiet fear of losing something he did not even have yet. He rubbed his hands slowly, trying to ease the tension he felt rising like a tide. Inside the hallway, Sandra stood with her back straight, trying to prepare herself. The man looked at her with a familiar sadness in his eyes, a sadness she recognized immediately. He said he had heard she would be here and hoped they could talk, even if only for a moment. She nodded, but her voice trembled slightly when she asked what he wanted to talk about. He sighed and admitted that he wanted closure, that he wanted to apologize for the past, and that he hoped she did not still hold anger toward him. The words hit her with unexpected force, because she had not planned to relive any memories tonight. She remembered the difficult ending they had shared years ago, the disagreements, the emotional exhaustion, and the quiet way they drifted apart until their connection dissolved completely. She had forgiven him over time, but the scars remained buried under layers of acceptance and distance. Now those memories returned like shadows creeping across her heart. He asked if her life had truly moved on. The question came softly, yet it cut deeply. Sandra did not want to answer, but she knew honesty was the only way to bring peace to both of them. She said she had moved forward and the past no longer controlled her. He nodded with a slow, pained smile, as if he had expected her answer but hoped for something different. Then he asked the question Sandra feared he would ask. He asked if seeing Keanu tonight meant anything to her. The question froze her. She felt her breath catch, her chest tighten, and the hallway suddenly felt too narrow. She tried to stay composed, but the truth was complicated. She told him that Keanu was an old friend, someone she respected deeply, and someone she had not seen in many years. She tried to keep her tone neutral, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. The man noticed her subtle reaction, and his expression softened with understanding. He told her that if Keanu still meant something to her, she should not run from it. He said he had made mistakes in their past and did not want her to repeat the same pattern with someone who genuinely cared for her. His voice cracked slightly as he said that he saw the way her eyes changed the moment Keanu walked into the hall, and he knew it was not nothing. Sandra felt shaken by his words, not because they were harsh, but because they were painfully honest. She had spent years avoiding her own truth, convincing herself that her feelings for Keanu were long gone. Now she felt trapped between the past and the possibility of something new that scared her in ways she could not explain. Her hands trembled slightly as she thanked him for being honest and wished him peace moving forward. He nodded, took a deep breath, and walked away with quiet dignity, leaving her alone with thoughts that felt too heavy to hold. Meanwhile, Keanu stood near a table watching couples dance as he pretended to focus on the music. Inside him, emotions tangled like threads. He tried to stay calm, telling himself that whatever conversation Sandra was having was none of his business, but his heart refused to listen. He remembered the way she looked at him during the dance, the softness in her voice when she whispered that she missed him, and the way she seemed afraid of losing something she never fully held. Minutes later, Sandra returned to the hall. She stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the room. When her eyes found Keanu, she paused, taking in the way he stood with a quiet tension in his shoulders. She felt a mixture of guilt, relief, and nervousness. She approached him slowly, her steps soft against the polished floor. When she reached him, he looked at her with eyes that carried questions he did not dare ask. She apologized for stepping away, and Keanu nodded gently, saying he understood. But the silence that followed felt heavier than before. It was full of unspoken tension, the kind that comes when two people stand too close to something they fear to admit. Sandra felt the weight of her emotions growing, and Keanu felt his own walls struggling to stand. Before either of them could speak, the bride approached them with excitement, pulling them toward a special group photo. The interruption came like a sudden break in the storm forming around them. Guests gathered quickly, laughing and adjusting their positions, unaware of the emotional struggle unfolding behind the quiet expressions of Keanu and Sandra. As the photographer prepared the shot, Keanu stood beside Sandra. Their shoulders touched lightly, sending a spark of warmth down her spine. Keanu felt it too, and he tried to steady his breathing as the feeling spread through him. The moment lingered in the few seconds before the camera flash, long enough for both of them to feel something undeniable return. And just when it seemed they might finally find a moment to talk after the photos, someone walked up to Keanu and whispered something urgent in his ear. The message made his entire expression shift instantly. His calm face tightened, his eyes sharpened, and the warmth in his posture vanished. Sandra felt her heart drop when she saw the sudden change. She asked if everything was okay, but Keanu could not answer yet. He stepped back slowly, his face filled with a seriousness she had not seen in years. And then he said something that made her breath stop. He said he needed to step outside. Now, the moment Keanu said he needed to step outside, something inside Sandra tightened with worry. His tone was calm but carried a hidden weight, the kind that did not come from simple inconvenience. She watched him move toward the exit with controlled urgency, his steps quick but steady, and she felt a growing unease she could not explain. The wedding hall remained bright and cheerful behind them, but the air around Sandra had shifted into something colder, heavier, almost foreboding. She hesitated only a few seconds before following him, keeping a careful distance so she did not overwhelm him. She stepped out of the hall and saw him near the large glass doors of the venue entrance. He was speaking quietly with someone, a man dressed in a dark suit with a tense expression, clearly carrying news that was not meant for the middle of a celebration. The man handed Keanu a phone, and the look on Keanu's face changed with each passing second as he listened. Sandra's worry grew with every breath she took. Keanu handed the phone back slowly, and his shoulders sagged slightly as if a heavy burden had just settled on them. He took a long breath, trying to compose himself, but his eyes remained tight with emotion. Sandra stepped closer, unsure if she should interrupt, but she could not walk away either. When he finally noticed her near the door, he lifted his head and forced a gentle, controlled expression, but she could see right through it. She asked softly if everything was all right, though she already sensed the answer. Keanu hesitated before responding, as if choosing his words carefully. He said there had been a situation, something personal, something he needed to handle immediately. He did not give details yet, but the heaviness in his voice revealed that this was not something small or easily fixed. Sandra stepped closer, her worry deepening. She asked if he needed help or if someone from the wedding could assist him. He shook his head gently, appreciating her concern but clearly struggling to keep himself centered. He told her it was something he had kept private for a long time, something he did not want to burden anyone with. But Sandra felt a surge of emotion, not because of curiosity, but because she hated seeing him pretend he was fine when he clearly was. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, a soft gesture she hoped would comfort him without pushing too hard. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if grounding himself through her touch. When he opened them again, they carried a vulnerability she had not seen in years. He told her he might have to leave the wedding for a while, maybe even for the rest of the night, depending on how things unfolded. Sandra felt her heart sink at the thought of him walking away again, especially now when everything between them was finally resurfacing. She asked him what happened. This time, Keanu looked away before answering, his jaw tightening as if he was debating whether he should tell her the truth. After a long moment, he confessed quietly that someone close to him had reached out unexpectedly, someone he had been trying to reconnect with after years of distance. He said the call was emotional, heavy, and full of things he had not prepared himself to face tonight. Sandra listened with growing empathy. She knew Keanu carried deep emotional wounds beneath his calm exterior, and she understood that he rarely allowed people to see that side of him. She wanted to ask more, but she sensed that pushing him now would only make him retreat. Instead, she told him she was here if he needed someone to talk to, even if it was for a few minutes before he left. Keanu looked at her, his eyes softening in a way that made her chest ache. He said he appreciated her more than she knew, but there were things he needed to understand himself before he could explain them to anyone else. Sandra nodded gently, respecting his boundaries but feeling the quiet sting of distance returning between them. The man in the dark suit approached again, reminding Keanu that the car was ready. Keanu nodded and began walking toward the exit with slow steps. Sandra followed quietly, unable to let the moment end so abruptly. When they reached the outer entrance where the night air was cool and quiet, Keanu turned to her. The soft glow of the streetlight fell across his face, revealing the strain he was trying to hide. He told her he did not want to disappear without saying goodbye, not like before, not after the moment they shared on the dance floor. Sandra felt her heart twist painfully because she realized how much that dance meant to him too. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper, telling him that she understood he needed to go, but she hoped he would come back tonight. He held her gaze with an expression full of conflict, longing, and unfinished emotions. Keanu reached out and gently touched her hand. The contact was soft, hesitant, yet full of meaning. He said he would try his best to return, and if he didn't, he hoped they could talk soon, really talk without distractions or interruptions. Sandra nodded, trying to keep her own emotions steady, though her heart felt heavier with every second. Before he could step into the car, Sandra asked him one more question. She asked if the person who called him was someone he missed. His expression shifted instantly. Pain flickered through his eyes before he could hide it. He took a slow breath and said yes, he missed them more than he wanted to admit. But then he added something else, something that made Sandra's breath catch. He said he wasn't sure if reconnecting now would bring healing or open old wounds he wasn't ready to face. The words lingered in the silence between them. The driver opened the door and Keanu stepped inside. Sandra watched him for a long moment before he finally looked up at her from the seat. Their eyes met one last time, full of emotions neither of them dared to speak. The car door closed gently. And as the car drove away, Sandra felt an unexpected chill run through her, a feeling that something bigger and more complicated than she imagined was unfolding. She turned back toward the glowing wedding hall, trying to steady her breath, unaware that someone inside the hall had been watching her the entire time she stood with Keanu outside. Someone who knew exactly what she was feeling. Someone who had their own plan for the rest of the night. The person watching from inside. Sandra re-entered the warm glow of the wedding hall with a tightness in her chest she tried to hide behind a soft smile. Guests were laughing, dancing, and enjoying the celebration, unaware that her thoughts were miles away, tangled in worry, confusion, and the quiet ache that Keanu left behind when he drove away into the night. She moved toward the refreshment table, hoping a moment alone would help her breathe again, but she could still feel a lingering chill on her skin from the conversation outside. As she lifted a glass of water, something told her she was not alone. A presence hovered near her, not loud or intrusive, but attentive in a way that made her heart pick up its pace. She turned slightly and saw someone approaching with a slow, deliberate walk, someone she recognized instantly. It was the bride's cousin, a woman named Alina, who had known Sandra for years but was never particularly close. Alina's expression was calm, almost too calm, like she had been rehearsing her words for the right moment. Lena greeted her warmly, but there was something in her eyes Sandra could not read. Sandra tried to respond politely, but her thoughts were still tangled in Keanu's sudden departure. Lena tilted her head slightly and said she had seen Sandra and Keanu outside together. Her tone was neutral, but the words cut through Sandra's attempt to remain steady. Sandra forced a gentle smile and said it was nothing serious, just a quick conversation. Lena nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. She said she hoped Sandra was all right, and Sandra felt a small tension build inside her, unsure where this conversation was heading. Lena leaned a little closer, lowering her voice so no one around could hear. She told Sandra that she had known Keanu would come tonight and that she suspected something like this would happen, something emotional, something complicated. Sandra felt her breath pause for a moment. She asked Alina what she meant by that. Alina hesitated, then said she did not want to interfere, but she knew things about Keanu that Sandra might not be aware of. Sandra felt a cold wave of suspicion and concern wash over her. She asked gently what Alina was trying to say. Alina sighed and explained that she had recently spoken with someone connected to Keanu's private struggles, someone who believed Keanu was dealing with far more than he let people see. She said that while she admired Sandra's kindness, she feared Sandra might get pulled into something emotionally heavy without knowing the full truth. The words unsettled Sandra deeply. She knew Keanu had scars, quiet ones he never spoke about, but hearing it from someone else felt intrusive and wrong. She asked Alina carefully who she had spoken to, but Alina avoided answering directly. Instead, she said that the person who called Keanu earlier tonight was not just someone from his past. They were someone who carried a painful history with him, someone who might be reaching out now because things in their life were falling apart. Sandra felt the air leave her lungs. She asked if Alina knew who that person was. Alina hesitated again, then admitted she did not know the full story, only that the situation was emotionally charged and possibly complicated. Sandra's fingers tightened around her glass. Alina placed a gentle hand on her arm and told her that if she chose to be involved with Keanu again, she needed to be prepared for the emotional weight that came with it. The comment struck Sandra in a vulnerable place. She had tried so hard to stay steady tonight, but the mixture of seeing Keanu again, reliving old feelings, watching him leave abruptly, and now hearing someone else hint at troubles she did not understand made her feel lost. She thanked Alina quietly and excused herself, needing air again, needing space, needing clarity. She stepped into a quiet hallway near the restrooms, her breathing uneven as she leaned against the wall. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her thoughts. She did not want gossip, she did not want assumptions, and she certainly did not want anyone interfering with something she had barely begun to understand herself. What she wanted was honesty. What she wanted was the truth from Keanu and no one else. As she stood there trying to calm her breath, a different voice interrupted her thoughts. It was soft, hesitant, and full of sincerity. She turned and saw the bride, her closest friend, standing with worried eyes. The bride placed a hand on Sandra's shoulder and asked if she was doing all right. Sandra tried to smile, but her friend immediately shook her head, saying she had known Sandra too long to be fooled by polite answers. Sandra sighed softly and admitted that the night had become overwhelming. She explained what happened with Keanu in gentle detail, careful not to reveal anything too personal but honest enough for her friend to understand the emotional mess she was trapped in. The bride listened quietly, her eyes full of understanding. When Sandra finished, her friend took both her hands and said something Sandra needed to hear. She told Sandra that whatever Keanu was dealing with, he would never bring her into it carelessly. She said Keanu was someone who carried guilt heavily and would rather push people away than let them get hurt because of him. She said that if he admitted even a fraction of vulnerability tonight, then it meant something deeper than Sandra realized. Sandra felt tears sting the corners of her eyes because those words touched something she had been trying to ignore. She whispered that she was afraid of getting hurt again, afraid of reopening something that took years to close. Her friend understood and told her that fear was normal, but life rarely gave people a second chance with the same person unless there was unfinished meaning behind it. Before Sandra could respond, they both heard a loud cheer erupt from the main hall. A voice announced that the bride and groom were ready for their first dance as a married couple. The bride smiled softly at Sandra, squeezed her hand, and hurried back inside. Sandra took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and slowly made her way back into the hall. The lights were dimmer now, the music softer, and the atmosphere more intimate. Couples gathered around the dance floor as the bride and groom stepped into the center, holding each other gently as the first notes of their song filled the room. As Sandra watched them dance, she felt something shift inside her, something fragile and emotional. She placed her hand over her heart, trying to ease the ache she felt. And just as she tried to center herself again, someone approached her quietly from behind. The voice that spoke her name this time belonged to someone she least expected, someone who never involved themselves in emotional conversations, someone who had always been distant yet respectful. It was Keanu's longtime friend, a man who rarely attended events and mostly stayed out of public gatherings. He had come not to gossip, not to interfere, but because he carried a message Keanu wanted Sandra to hear. And that message would change the entire course of her night. The message Keanu left behind. Sandra felt her breath pause the moment she heard the familiar voice speak her name. She turned slowly and saw Mark, Keanu's longtime friend, standing a short distance away. He looked uneasy, almost reluctant, as if he wished the responsibility placed on him belonged to someone else. He approached her with soft steps, careful not to draw attention from the surrounding guests. His expression carried a calm seriousness that made Sandra's heart tighten with worry all over again. Mark greeted her politely, but she could tell by the subtle tension in his voice that this was not a casual conversation. She asked gently if everything was okay, and Mark exhaled slowly before telling her that Keanu had asked him to speak with her if he did not return to the wedding quickly. Sandra felt a sudden ache in her chest at the possibility that Keanu might not come back at all tonight. Mark motioned for them to step toward a quieter corner of the hall, away from the crowd and the music. Sandra followed him, her heart growing heavier with each step. Once they were alone near the tall curtains near a dim corner, Mark took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. He told Sandra that Keanu's phone call earlier had come from someone deeply tied to an unresolved chapter of his life, someone who had resurfaced tonight because things had taken an unexpected turn. Sandra listened carefully, trying to stay calm even as her nerves tightened like a knot. Mark said he could not reveal all the details because those were Keanu's stories to tell, not his. But he added that the person who called Keanu had been struggling for a long time on the edge of a difficult situation, and they had reached out only because they had no one else they trusted. The call had shaken Keanu more than he expected, and he had left the wedding carrying a weight Mark had not seen on his face in years. Sandra felt the room dim slightly as she processed the words. She asked Mark if the person was a family member, a close friend, or someone from Keanu's past relationship. Mark shook his head gently, saying he could not name them, but he assured her it was not someone who would hurt her life or intrude in a destructive way. He emphasized that the situation was emotional rather than dangerous, personal rather than chaotic. Sandra lowered her head, feeling a mix of relief and new confusion. Mark noticed her struggle and softened his tone. He said Keanu had asked him to give her a message, one that he hoped would bring her clarity instead of worry. Sandra looked up slowly, her eyes searching Mark's for answers she feared and desired at the same time. Mark told her that before Keanu stepped into the car, he said one thing that he needed Sandra to hear. He said Keanu had spent years trying to convince himself that his distance from her was the right choice, that staying apart had protected them both from something they were not ready to face. He believed that avoiding old feelings would help them heal and move forward. But tonight, seeing her again, hearing her voice, feeling her hand in his during their dance, everything inside him told him he had been wrong. The words hit Sandra with the force of a quiet storm. Her heart trembled, her breath staggered, and her hands felt cold. Mark continued gently, saying that Keanu had realized something he had tried to suppress for years. He said Keanu confessed that the moment Sandra whispered she had missed him, something broke open inside him that he could not push back down anymore. He said Keanu finally understood that leaving things unsaid had only deepened the distance between them, and he regretted allowing so many years to pass without trying to mend it. Sandra felt tears rising, not from sadness alone, but from the overwhelming truth she had been denying for so long. Mark paused, letting her absorb the weight of what he had said. She wiped her eyes quietly, trying to steady her breath as emotions swirled through her like a rising tide. Mark continued with the final part of Keanu's message. He said that if Sandra still held even a small piece of what she once felt, Keanu wanted her to know he was willing to sit down, talk, and face their unfinished story honestly, even if it scared him. He said Keanu was done running from the past, done pretending he had moved on fully, done hiding behind his own fears. The only thing he needed was time tonight to deal with the emotional call that pulled him away. Sandra pressed her hand against her chest, overwhelmed. Years of unspoken feelings crashed over her at once, and she felt her knees weaken slightly from the intensity of it all. She whispered Keanu's name softly, almost afraid to let her voice fall apart. Mark watched her with a gentle patience, giving her room to breathe through the emotion. When she finally looked at him again, he added something she did not expect. He told her that Keanu had also asked one more question, one he wanted her to answer when they talked again. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of years of silence. Keanu wanted to know if Sandra regretted their distance, or if she had ever wished they had tried to stay closer when they had the chance. Sandra felt her breath catch. The question sliced deeply into the quiet longing she had buried for so long. She whispered that she needed time to think, time to understand her own heart again. Mark nodded, saying that Keanu had expected that and that he wanted her to take as much time as she needed. He did not want rushed answers, only honest ones. Mark placed a gentle hand on her shoulder before stepping back. He told her that Keanu had not disappeared out of fear or avoidance. He had left because the call demanded immediate attention, and he hoped Sandra would not misinterpret his absence as rejection. He asked her to trust that Keanu would return if he could, and if not tonight, then soon, with the truth she deserved. When Mark walked away, Sandra remained standing in the quiet corner of the hall, her thoughts spinning in circles. She pressed her hand over her heart, trying to calm the storm inside her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, hopeful, and terrified all at once. She wanted answers, she wanted clarity, and she wanted Keanu to stand in front of her again so she could look into his eyes and understand what had changed between them. She returned to the main hall slowly, her mind too full to focus on the music or the dancing. She sat at a table, her fingers tracing the pattern on the linen cloth while her thoughts drifted back to every moment she had ever shared with Keanu. Memories came in waves, gentle, painful, beautiful, and she felt her chest tighten with longing she could no longer deny. As the night deepened, guests began leaving one by one, but Sandra stayed, hoping for a sign, a message, anything that told her whether he would return. The hall lights dimmed slightly as the staff prepared for cleanup, and the bride approached Sandra with a gentle smile, asking if she needed company. Sandra shook her head softly, saying she just needed a little more time to think. The bride hugged her tightly and whispered that she believed Keanu would come back if he could. Sandra nodded, though her heart trembled with doubt. She stepped outside into the cool night air, breathing deeply as she looked up at the sky. The quiet street was empty, the wedding music faint behind her. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure if she was ready for whatever was coming next. And then, just as she turned to head back inside, a car pulled up slowly beside the entrance. The headlights dimmed. The engine turned off. The door opened. And Sandra froze completely when she saw who stepped out. The night that changed everything. The moment Sandra saw the car door open, her breath stopped completely. The cool night air felt thinner, sharper, almost unreal as she froze in place. Keanu stepped out slowly, closing the door with a gentle motion that contrasted deeply with the emotional storm written across his face. He looked exhausted, raw, and shaken, yet there was something in his eyes that carried purpose, something steady and determined that Sandra had not seen in years. He walked toward her with slow steps, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. Sandra's heart pounded so loudly she felt it in her throat. She wanted to run to him, she wanted to hide, she wanted to cry, she wanted answers, too many emotions fighting in her chest at once. When he stopped in front of her only a few feet away, neither of them spoke at first. The silence felt full, heavy, intimate. Keanu took a breath, the kind that carried truth in it. He said her name softly, and the sound of it made her eyes sting instantly. She whispered his name in return, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer mask. He stepped closer, his shoulders dropping slightly as if letting go of a weight he had been carrying all night. He told her he was sorry for leaving so suddenly, and that the call had been more emotional than he expected. He explained that the person who called him was someone from a chapter of his life he had left unresolved, someone who needed him tonight in a moment of serious vulnerability. Sandra listened closely, her chest tightening with empathy rather than jealousy. She nodded gently, encouraging him to continue. He said the call forced him to confront pieces of his past he had kept buried, pieces that reminded him how much time he had lost and how many chances he had silently let slip away. He said he realized, while he was in that car dealing with that emotional situation, that he was tired of hiding parts of himself from the people who mattered. He said he was tired of running. Sandra felt her eyes fill with tears as she listened, because she had never seen him speak this openly, not even years ago when they were close. He stepped even closer now, standing only inches from her, his voice low and vulnerable. He said he regretted the distance between them more than he had ever admitted to himself. He said he realized tonight that he had allowed fear to dictate too many of his choices, fear of hurting her, fear of not being enough, fear of trying and failing. Sandra's lips parted slightly, her breath shaky. She felt the truth of his words touch every quiet corner of her heart that she had tried to lock away. Keanu reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted, but she did not. She placed her hand in his gently, feeling warmth rush through her at the simple contact. He squeezed her hand softly and said something that made her breath falter. He said he had missed her deeply, not in the casual sense people use when they think about old friends, but in a way that lingered through years, through film sets, through nights he wished he could speak to someone who understood him without explanation. He said he had missed the comfort she brought, the calm she carried, and the way she always looked at him like she saw more than the world ever bothered to see. Sandra felt a tear fall down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, but Keanu gently touched her wrist, shaking his head softly as if to tell her she did not need to hide. She swallowed hard and whispered that she had missed him too, more than she allowed herself to admit. She said she had spent years wondering why they drifted apart, wondering if there was something they had both been too afraid to face. Keanu's eyes softened even deeper, his voice becoming quieter as he told her that he had always felt something for her that he never knew how to name. He said he had convinced himself that staying silent was the safer choice, that she deserved someone less complicated, someone whose life was not full of emotional cracks and quiet battles. But tonight, seeing her dance, feeling her close, hearing her voice break when she said she missed him, made him realize that holding his silence had been the real mistake. The night felt still around them, as if time had paused to listen. Sandra stepped a little closer, feeling her heart open in a way that scared her yet felt deeply right. She told him she had spent years trying to forget her own feelings, trying to convince herself that they were simply old memories. But when she saw him walk into the wedding tonight, everything inside her returned so fast that she felt breathless. Keanu's face softened with a mixture of relief and longing. He brushed his thumb lightly across the back of her hand in a gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. He whispered that he did not want them to lose each other again, not like before, not because of fear or timing or silence. He told her that if she was willing, he wanted to start again, not from where they left off, but from who they were now, older, wiser, and finally ready to be honest. Sandra felt her tears fall freely now, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing words she had once dreamed of but never expected. She nodded slowly, her breath trembling, telling him she wanted the same, but she needed to know one thing first. She asked him if the person who called him tonight would pull him away from her emotionally. She needed to know if she was stepping into a storm she was not prepared for. Keanu took her hands fully in his, lifting them gently as he held her gaze with sincerity and quiet strength. He said the person who called him was someone who needed emotional closure, not someone who would pull him away from Sandra. He said the pain from that chapter was real, but it did not belong to the future he hoped to rebuild. He said the only person he wanted to return to tonight was her. The words made Sandra's breath break in her throat. She stepped into him without thinking, resting her forehead lightly against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her with a tenderness that melted every wall she had built. The warmth of his embrace felt like coming home after years of wandering through uncertainty. He held her gently, his chin resting softly near her temple, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. They stood like that for a long moment under the soft glow of the streetlights, savoring the quiet, the closeness, the truth of finally being honest after years of silence. When she pulled back slightly to look up at him, he brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered that he wanted to take this slowly, respectfully, and with full honesty. He said he did not want grand declarations or rushed promises. He wanted real connection, real understanding, real effort. Sandra nodded, feeling her heart steady with clarity rather than fear. She told him she wanted that too, something real, something honest, something neither of them had been ready for all those years ago. He smiled softly, a quiet, relieved smile she had missed more than she realized. They walked back toward the entrance of the wedding hall hand in hand, not as two people stuck in the past, but as two people finally ready to face the future with open hearts. Sandra leaned her head lightly against his shoulder as they reached the door. When they stepped inside, the bride saw them from across the room and smiled so brightly it made Sandra blush. Keanu laughed softly and squeezed Sandra's hand. The wedding staff were cleaning up, the last song of the night playing gently through the speakers. The hall felt peaceful, warm, intimate. Keanu turned to Sandra and asked if she wanted one last dance before the night ended. Her smile answered before her voice did. They stepped onto the empty dance floor, moving slowly to the soft melody, holding each other with quiet tenderness. As they danced, Sandra whispered that she wished the night would never end. Keanu whispered back that some nights do not end, they simply become the beginning of something new. And in that quiet, intimate moment, surrounded by soft lights and fading music, their years of silence finally melted into something hopeful, fragile, real, and deeply human. The night that began with uncertainty ended with a second chance neither of them expected. A chance that would reshape both their lives in ways they had never dared to imagine.